Here we go with chapter 2, guys. This is the Queen's Gambit Decline, Nimzo Indian Others chapter, where black doesn't play an early for bishop d6. I got a fresh haircut, and Jesse's got a fresh tan. We're ready to go.
Yeah, we finally have some good weather here in Minnesota. It was like 30s and then 80 just like overnight.
Insane.
So getting outside as much as we can. All right, we're going through the Londons. We're doing our knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4. This is all stuff we've seen already. E3, and c5. So this is the first new move that we've seen so far. A challenging move, kind of like chipping away at our center already, grabbing some space, and allowing for this nice harmonious development. So I think you'll see c5 quite a bit, particularly as like the higher you get up in your ratings. Do you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And in the next chapter, we'll go through early c5s, but in this chapter, we're kind of going with the e6 setup and then coming to c5 later. So here, what we do is we meet queen b6 with queen b3 whenever we can. So I want to keep this course like as easy to play as possible. That's one of the goals of this London course. So our recommendation after c5 is to play c3. So that's our other rule. We meet c5 with c3. We meet queen b6 with queen b3. So get ready now because those two tips are going to be a broken record the rest of this course.
Yeah, that's something we like to do with all of our courses whenever possible, particularly in the Caros. Like we want to go for similar setups. So if we can just remember these moves, it'll be through all 10 chapters, all these lines. So something to look forward to in the future lines as well. So after c3, I think we're going to look at a couple moves here. Let's start with knight c6. So just applying a little more pressure on the d4 square, though there's nothing really there yet. And we are going to respond by just developing to knight bd2. So nice move. It kind of prepares one of these pawn breaks in the future. All right, so we just saw bishop d6. We can take here, of course. We can have a bunch of moves here. We can bring the knight in even. But we are actually going to retreat. And if you remember this from the last chapter, we kind of want to open up this file and make it a little spicy, give us a little counterplay if possible. So we'll drop back. And this is actually a transposition from the first chapter. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's another thing we're going to do in this course is we're going to try to point out all the transpositions because there's quite a few of them. So let's back up just to right here and let's go bishop to e7 instead. This is a new move. And the idea here is black oftentimes wants to play knight h5, attacking this bishop. And the reason they do that is they want to trade their knight for our bishop, and then they get what's called the bishop pair. That means they have two bishops remaining, and we just have the one bishop on the board. So here, what I like to recommend is pawn to h3 right away. And the idea is we can tuck that bishop safely on h2 if black plays knight h5.
Yeah, that's right. And they need the bishop here because otherwise, if they went bishop h5 the move before, we could slide the bishop to g5. Now we're hitting the queen, and then we can kind of wiggle away that way. So bishop is there. That's a kind of our cue. Okay, we need to save the bishop. Let's play h3. Black is going to castle. Good move. And we're going to play bishop d6. So this is pretty harmonious for how we want to develop. Again, adding a little bit of control for this e4 break.
Yeah, and this is like the setup that you're always going to go for. So look at this white setup, remember it, because that's going to be your plan. So now let's look at pawn to b6. And like we saw in the first chapter, the toughest piece for black to develop is that bishop on c8. So a lot of times you'll see pawn to b6 just to try to bring that guy out to the fianchetto square. And in chapter 1, we met b6 with e4. But in this chapter, we note that the black queen is lined up with our d pawn. And what can happen is if you play for e4, sometimes this pawn trades off. Let me get rid of a couple of these arrows. And the queen in the end applies a third attacker to this pawn on d4. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're about to play e4 on autopilot, make sure that d pawn is safe. So we're switching gears here. We're going to stick the knight on e5. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a nice aggressive move. And I think we have a few lines coming up that shows kind of how black can go wrong by taking here. That's not this line in particular, I don't think. But it's a nice aggressive move. It's a nice square for the knight too. It's like nice and centralized up top. So black is going to continue their development. And at this point, I think we make a note here is if they decide to take, we can take with the d pawn. And now this knight needs to find somewhere good to go. And it just gets a little, like we just kind of gain a tempo there.
Yeah, and that D pawn kind of, that's the start of our attack. If you can dislodge the knight with the D pawn heading to E5, we'll see some lines later, but that's a great attack. All right, so now let's kingside castle. And we are definitely going to attack kingside still. The most common move here is knight takes E5, so let's dive right into this. Knight takes, D takes E5. Are you afraid of having these double pawns on the E file, E5 and E3?
Well, it does look counterintuitive because typically you want to take with the bishop and preserve your pawn structure. However, uh, we're going to kind of see the kind of the benefit of this. So look at how good our pieces are. Our bishop is landing up right against the king. Our queen can pop up very quickly. This bishop does a good job of adding an extra defender to this pawn. On top of that, this knight has to go backwards. So we're looking at one, two. This knight can come in three, four pieces right around the king, and black is kind of saddled with only two defenders, not doing that good of a job.
I've played this from the black side sometimes. It's not fun after knight d7. It's not fun having the bishop here, the knight here, the bishop here, queen here. Nothing feels like it's ready to help out over on the king side. So that's what black is thinking, especially after this next move we're recommending, queen g4, putting the immediate attack on g7. Jesse already pointed out how every piece is pointing kingside. And now the top move for black, it's the top engine move, also the top move played at the club level, is pawn to g6. Ooh, and look at these dark squares around the black king.
Yeah, it's not looking good. There's no knockout punch quite yet, but I think we need to just like keep developing our pieces and just like let black sit in this tension because it's not easy to get more defenders to the king side. We can't get too quick with pushing this pawn because that square is defended. So let's just take some calming moves, bring our rook over, and there's no knockout here, but this attack is very strong. But I think kind of what we want to do is bring our other rook in. Maybe we can play e4 and bring our knight in this way. Maybe they'll even take. We can come in here, maybe land a knight here someday, bring a knight here. Lots of arrows I'm drawing, but lots of different attacking ideas.
And I notice all those arrows are going the same direction towards that black
That's right.
king.
Yes,
So
that's the goal.
yeah, that's the first line. It's a 1.3 eval, and we got a nice long-term attacking plan there.